I found out about the pajamas on a Tuesday night, the kind of night where the air feels heavier because you already know something is wrong before it actually happens. I was sitting on the edge of my bed, laptop open, calculator app glowing on the screen as I tried to stretch my last paycheck into something that could survive until the end of the month. Rent was due in 4 days. $200 short. Not $5,000. Not even $1,000. Just $200. My phone buzzed. A family group chat notification. I almost ignored it, because every message in that thread usually made me feel smaller in ways I couldn't explain without sounding dramatic. But curiosity won. I tapped it. The screen filled with photos. Not one. Not two. An entire album. My parents. My siblings. Cousins. Aunts. Uncles. Everyone standing in front of a decorated fireplace, all wearing identical red and green pajamas. Same pattern. Same logo stitched over the chest. Someone had even added fuzzy socks to match. Mom had captioned it. "Family is everything. 2 hearts worth every penny." I stared at the words until they blurred. Worth every penny. Another message popped up. Dad this time. Custom order. Took weeks to plan, but so worth it. Cost a bit, but memories matter. Cost a bit. I scrolled back to the message I had sent them 2 days earlier. Hey, I'm a little short on rent this month. I just need $200 to cover it. I can pay you back next paycheck. Mom's reply was still sitting there, unchanged. We really can't right now. Things are tight. You'll figure it out. Things are tight. I looked back at the pajama photos. I zoomed in without meaning to. Embroidered names. Personalized gift boxes stacked under the tree. Someone had even hired a photographer because the lighting was too perfect to be accidental. $5,000. That number didn't come from nowhere. My cousin had bragged about it in a separate message earlier that day. You should have seen the invoice face with tears of joy, but Mom wanted it perfect. Perfect. I set my phone down slowly, like it might shatter if I moved too fast. My chest felt tight, not with anger yet, but with something colder. Recognition. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't bad timing. It was a pattern finally caught on camera. I thought back to the phone call from Sunday. The one where I'd tried to sound casual, light, like asking for help was no big deal. It's just been a weird month, I'd said. I'm not asking for much. Mom had sighed on the other end. You know we'd help if we could. But everyone's stretched thin right now. Stretched thin. I wondered if she'd practiced that line in the mirror. If it came out as easily as it always did. I stood up and paced my tiny bedroom. Carpet was worn near the door, the paint chipped near the window. This place wasn't luxurious. It wasn't aesthetic. It was survival. And suddenly, survival felt embarrassing in a family that dressed matching for photos. My phone buzzed again. A video this time. My sister twirling in her pajamas, laughing. Don't you love them? She said into the camera. Mom said we all needed something special this year. Something special. I typed a reply. Deleted it. Typed again. Deleted that too. What do you say when the math is this insulting? When $5,000 is memories, but $200 is an impossible burden. I sat back down on the bed and opened my banking app. Numbers stared back at me. Cold. Indifferent. Rent. Utilities. Groceries. The math didn't lie, even if my family did. For the first time, the thought didn't come with guilt. They didn't forget me. They didn't misunderstand me. They chose. And that realization hurt worse than being told no. I picked up my phone again, not to text them, but to take one last look at the photos. Everyone smiling. Everyone warm. Everyone matching. I wasn't in any of them. Not because I lived far away. Not because I was busy. but because needing help didn't match the image. And sitting there, $200 short of keeping a roof over my head, I realized something quietly devastating. In this family, comfort was a costume, and I had never been invited to wear it. That night, sleep didn't come easily. It hovered somewhere above me, close enough to feel but far enough to stay out of reach. I lay on my back staring at the cracked line in the ceiling that looked like a map to nowhere, replaying the same two images over and over again. My bank balance. Their pajamas. Every time I closed my eyes, the numbers lined up in my head like a cruel equation. $5,000 for matching fabric and photos. $200 denied when I asked for help to keep my apartment. It wasn't the money itself that kept my heart racing. It was the message behind it. The translation I'd been avoiding my entire life. I grabbed my phone again, scrolling through old messages the way people poke bruises just to confirm they're still there. Birthdays where I'd gotten a single emoji. Holidays where my gifts came late if they came at all. Messages where I'd shared good news about work and got a thumbs up in response. Meanwhile, every minor update from my siblings had been met with paragraphs, exclamation points, heart reactions. I remembered the first time I moved out on my own. I'd been terrified but proud, holding the keys to a place that barely fit a couch. Mom had smiled politely and said, "Well, that'll teach you responsibility." Dad had joked, "Guess you're on your own now." The time I thought that was encouragement, independence, growth. Now, lying in bed with rent hanging over my head, I realized it had been a warning. The next morning, I woke up early, not because I wanted to, but because anxiety doesn't respect alarms. I made coffee that tasted burnt and sat at my tiny kitchen table, laptop open again. I refreshed my email. Nothing. Refreshed my bank app. Still short. My phone buzzed. Mom again. "Did you see the pictures? Don't they look cozy?" Cozy. I stared at the message for a long moment. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I considered telling her the truth. That I hadn't slept. That I was scared. That I was $200 away from a late fee that would spiral into something worse. Instead, I typed, "Yeah, they look nice." The reply came quickly. "We needed something cheerful this year. Things have been stressful." I almost laughed. Almost. Trust to them meant planning outfits and coordinating colors. Trust to me meant calculating how many days I could eat rice and eggs before my body started to feel it. Trust to me meant lying awake wondering how one small setback could unravel everything I'd worked for. At work, I couldn't focus. Numbers blurred together. Emails felt heavier than usual. My boss asked if I was okay, and I lied automatically the way I always had. Just tired. That line came easily. I'd been practicing it my whole life. During my lunch break, I sat outside on a bench and called my dad. Not to ask again. Just to hear his voice. Just to confirm I wasn't imagining the distance. "Hey, kiddo," he answered. "What's up?" I swallowed. "I just wanted to talk for a minute." There was a pause. Then, "I'm kinda busy right now. Is everything okay?" "Yeah," I said quickly. "I just never mind." "Well, you know how it is," he said. "Things are hectic. We're doing the best we can. Doing the best we can." After we hung up, I sat there longer than I meant to, watching people walk past with coffees, backpacks, conversations. Everyone looked like they belonged somewhere. Like someone would notice if they disappeared. That's when a thought surfaced, slow and uncomfortable. If I didn't pay my rent, there would be consequences. Real ones. Notices. Fees. Fear. If they didn't help me, nothing happened to them at all. No discomfort. No loss. No guilt that lasted longer than a sentence. That imbalance had always existed. I'd just never named it before. That evening, my sister posted another photo. This one zoomed in on the pajamas, the stitching, the tags. Worth every dollar, she wrote. I put my phone face down and leaned back in my chair, staring at the wall. For the first time, I didn't feel jealous. I felt clear. They weren't cruel. They weren't evil. They were comfortable. And my struggle didn't fit into their comfort. That realization didn't make me cry. It made me quiet. And in that quiet, something shifted. I stopped thinking about how to explain myself to them. I stopped rehearsing conversations in my head. I stopped hoping for a different response next time. Instead, I started thinking about options. Not dramatic ones. Not revenge. Just practical, grounded choices that didn't rely on people who had already shown me where I ranked. $200 was still $200. But suddenly, it didn't feel like the biggest problem in the room. The real problem was that I'd been building my life on the assumption that if things ever got bad enough, my family would catch me. That safety net had never existed. And once I accepted that, something inside me finally stopped falling. By the third day, the panic had settled into something dull and constant, like a low-grade fever you stop noticing until it suddenly spikes. I went through my routine on autopilot. Shower. Coffee. Work. Smile at people who had no idea that my entire sense of security was hanging on $200 that my own family had decided was too much to ask for. At work, I caught myself staring at a spreadsheet for several minutes without actually seeing it. My thoughts kept drifting back to the same question, one I'd avoided for years because it made me uncomfortable. When did this start? Not the money. The imbalance. The quiet understanding that I was optional. I remembered being 12, standing in the hallway while my parents argued in the kitchen about finances. I'd overheard my mom say, "At least she's low maintenance." For the time, I'd felt proud. Like I was helping by not needing much. By not asking. By shrinking myself just enough to be convenient. That phrase echoed in my head now. Low maintenance. It hadn't meant resilient. It hadn't meant independent. It had meant invisible. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't planned on. I opened my email and searched for every message that included the word sorry. Not apologies from them. From me. Pages of them. Sorry I can't come home. Sorry I don't need anything. Sorry I'll figure it out. Sorry for bothering you. I'd been apologizing my way out of needing people my entire life. When my shift ended, I didn't go straight home. I walked aimlessly through the neighborhood, letting the cold air sting my face just enough to keep me present. I passed a cafe where families sat laughing together, kids tugging at sleeves, parents leaning in. I wondered if those kids would grow up learning that asking for help was normal. Or if they'd learn, like I did, that love came with conditions you didn't see until it was too late. My phone buzzed again. Another family message. This time it was a reminder about an upcoming dinner. "Everyone wear the pajamas again," my aunt wrote. "Let's recreate the photos." Recreate. I almost replied. Almost typed something sharp. Almost asked if they wanted to recreate the part where they told me they couldn't help when I was about to lose my apartment. But I didn't. Not because I was scared. Because I was tired. That night, I sat on my bed and opened a blank document on my laptop. Not a budget. Not an email. A list. I wrote at the top what I can control. Below it, I wrote everything I'd been pretending I couldn't do. Call my landlord. Ask for a short extension. Pick up an extra shift. Sell a few things I didn't need. Say no to people who drained me. Stop waiting for permission to take my own situation seriously. The list grew longer than I expected. Then I wrote a second list. What I can't control. My parents' priorities. My siblings' entitlement. The version of me they preferred. Seeing it laid out like that was sobering. I'd been pouring energy into the second list my entire life, hoping effort would turn into affection. Meanwhile, the first list sat ignored, even though it was the only one that could actually change my reality. Before bed, I called my landlord. My voice shook a little, but I told the truth. Not everything. Just enough. He listened. Asked a few questions. Then said, I can give you a week. No late fee. I hung up and stared at the wall, stunned. Relief washed over me, sharp and unexpected. Not because the problem was solved, but because I'd solved part of it without them. That realization hit harder than anything else had so far. I didn't need their help to survive. I'd just been conditioned to believe I did. The next morning, I woke up feeling lighter and angrier at the same time. Lighter because I wasn't about to be homeless. Angrier because $200 would have saved me days of stress they never even noticed. At work, I accepted an extra project without hesitation. That night, I listed a few unused items online. I skipped dinner out and cooked at home. None of it felt heroic. Felt necessary. And oddly empowering. Another message came from my mom that evening. Don't forget the dinner this weekend. It'll mean a lot to everyone. Mean a lot to everyone. I read it once. Twice. Then set my phone down without replying. For the first time, I didn't rush to reassure anyone. I didn't smooth things over. I didn't make myself available to keep the peace. Instead, I asked myself a question I'd never really allowed before. What does it mean to me? And in the silence that followed, the answer was uncomfortably clear. It meant pretending nothing was wrong. It meant smiling in matching pajamas while my own life quietly unraveled. It meant playing a role I'd outgrown. That night, as I turned off the lights and lay down, a new thought settled in. Calm. Steady. If they could spend $5,000 on an image, they could live without my participation in it. And maybe, just maybe, so could I. By the end of the week, the panic had transformed into something sharper. Not fear anymore. Awareness. Kind that doesn't scream but sits quietly in your chest and refuses to leave. I moved through my days with a strange clarity, noticing things I had always ignored because acknowledging them would have required change. I noticed how often I checked my phone not for emergencies but for validation. A message. A reaction. Proof that someone in my family had thought about me for more than a passing second. Every time the screen stayed dark, something in me tightened, then relaxed like a muscle learning a new pattern. Saturday morning came faster than I expected. The day of the dinner. The pajama dinner. I stood in my bathroom staring at my reflection, toothbrush paused midair, asking myself a question I'd never seriously considered before. What would actually happen if I didn't go? The answer wasn't dramatic. No one would collapse. No plans would be ruined. Photos would still be taken. The laughter would still happen. They would still match. The only difference would be me. I put the toothbrush down and felt a slow, unfamiliar sense of calm spread through my chest. That calm scared me more than the panic ever had. Panic meant I still believed something could be fixed if I just tried hard enough. Calm meant I was starting to accept that this was simply how things were. My phone buzzed around noon. My sister. You coming later? Mom wants to know what time you'll be here. I stared at the message. I imagined the kitchen. The smells. The noise. The forced cheer. The unspoken rule that no one would mention money or stress or reality. I imagined sitting there in borrowed comfort, pretending I wasn't counting dollars in my head while everyone else counted memories. Typed, deleted, typed again. I'm not going to make it tonight, I finally wrote. I need a quiet weekend. The reply came almost instantly. Oh. Okay. That's disappointing. Disappointing. I set the phone down and waited for the guilt to rush in. For the familiar wave of self-doubt. For the urge to explain myself, to justify my absence with reasons they might accept. It didn't come. Instead, I felt something steadier. Like standing on solid ground after years of balancing on something that kept shifting beneath me. That evening, while they gathered in matching pajamas, I stayed home. I cooked a simple meal. I ate slowly. I didn't rush. I didn't check my phone every 5 minutes. I let the silence exist without filling it. Around 8, the messages started. Photos, videos, laughter. Someone tagged me in a story with the caption, "Missing you." I didn't respond. Not out of spite. Out of honesty. Because being missed in a photo wasn't the same as being considered when it mattered. Later that night, my mom called. I watched the phone vibrate on the table for a long moment before answering. "Hey," she said, her voice bright but strained. "We thought you might change your mind." "I didn't," I replied. There was a pause. "Everything okay?" "Yes," I said. And again, I meant it. "Well," she continued, "we just don't understand why you're pulling away." I closed my eyes. Not in frustration. In concentration. Choosing my words carefully, not for her comfort, but for my own clarity. "I'm not pulling away," I said. "I'm just not pretending anymore." She didn't answer right away. When she did, her tone shifted. Defensive. "We've always done our best for you." "I know," I said quietly. "And I've always done my best to need less." Another silence. Heavier this time. "You're overthinking things," she finally said. "It was just pajamas." I almost laughed. Almost. "It was never about the pajamas," I replied. "It was about what happens when I need help and what happens when you want a moment." She sighed. "We can't keep revisiting the past." "I'm not," I said. "I'm dealing with the present." Call ended shortly after that. No resolution. No apology. No explosion. Just two people standing on opposite sides of a truth neither wanted to fully claim. Afterward, I sat on the couch in the dim light of my apartment and felt something click into place. They weren't confused. They just didn't like what clarity required of them. I checked my bank app again before bed. Still tight. Still careful. But manageable. Mine. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I was surviving despite them. I felt like I was finally surviving without needing their permission. That night, as I turned off the lamp and lay down, a thought settled in with unexpected certainty. If love only shows up when it's convenient, then distance isn't cruelty. It's self-preservation. And I was done apologizing for preserving myself. The days after the dinner passed differently than I expected. I thought there would be fallout. Accusations. Angry messages. Passive-aggressive comments disguised as concern. Instead, there was something worse. Normalcy. The family chat went quiet for almost 24 hours, then resumed like nothing had happened. New photos. New jokes. Plans being made without me. It was as if my absence had been noted, filed away, and instantly absorbed. The world hadn't stopped. The image hadn't cracked. That realization sat heavy in my chest. Not because I wanted attention, but because it confirmed something I had been afraid to admit. I had always believed I was holding the family together by showing up, by being agreeable, by not making waves. In reality, I was replaceable in the ways that mattered to them. I went to work early one morning and stayed late without being asked. Not as punishment, as focus. When you stop pouring energy into people who don't reciprocate, you suddenly have a lot more of it. I finished projects ahead of schedule, took on freelance work, built a buffer dollar by dollar, hour by hour. Every time my phone buzzed, my body still reacted. Years of conditioning don't disappear overnight. But I noticed something new. I no longer rushed to respond. I read messages fully before answering. Sometimes I chose not to answer at all. My sister texted midweek. "Mom thinks you're mad at her." I stared at the words for a long moment. Mad. As if this was a temporary emotion that would pass once I calmed down. I'm not mad, I typed back. I'm just done pretending things don't hurt. 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. She didn't mean it that way, my sister finally replied. That sentence had followed me my entire life. It had been used to smooth over everything from forgotten birthdays to dismissive comments to outright neglect. Intent over impact. Comfort over accountability. I know, I wrote, but it still did. There was no response after that. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table going over my finances again. Not obsessively this time. Strategically. I crossed off the $200 gap. It was covered. Barely, but covered. Relief washed over me, slow and real. I should have felt proud. Instead, I felt sad. Sad that solving my own crisis had been easier than convincing my family it mattered. Sad that strangers and side hustles had stepped up faster than the people who shared my last name. A memory surfaced then, uninvited. A holiday years ago when my mom had asked me to chip in for a gift for my dad. Just a little, she'd said. Everyone's contributing. I'd sent money immediately, even though it hurt my budget. Later, I'd watched my siblings take credit for the gift while my contribution went unmentioned. I'd smiled anyway. That was the pattern. Give quietly. Receive invisibly. That night, I dreamed I was standing outside a house with all the lights on. I could hear laughter through the walls, smell food, see movement through the windows. I knocked. No one answered. I knocked again, louder. Till nothing. Eventually, I stopped knocking. Not because the door opened. Because I got tired of waiting. I woke up with my heart pounding, but my mind clear. The next morning, my mom sent a message. We're thinking of planning a trip together soon. You should come. No acknowledgement. No reflection. Just another invitation to rejoin the narrative without addressing why I'd stepped out of it. I didn't respond right away. I let the message sit while I went about my day. I answered emails. Took a walk. Ate lunch without rushing. Later, I typed back. Thanks for thinking of me. I'm focusing on my own plans right now. It was polite. Honest. Final without being cruel. Her reply came hours later. Oh. Okay. We just want everyone together. Together. I set my phone down and leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. Together had always meant on their terms. In their timing. With their priorities centered and mine adjusted around the edges. I wasn't rejecting family. I was rejecting erasure. And the more I practiced that distinction, the steadier I felt. Less reactive. Less hopeful in the way that hurts. More grounded in what was actually happening instead of what I wished would happen. I realized then that independence wasn't about proving I didn't need them. It was about finally accepting that I couldn't rely on them and building accordingly. That night, as I turned off the lights and lay down, I didn't feel lonely. I felt aligned. Aligned with my limits. Aligned with my reality. Aligned with myself. And that alignment was something no amount of matching pajamas could ever buy. As the weeks passed, something unexpected happened. Constant noise in my head began to fade. The mental rehearsal of conversations that never went anywhere. The imaginary arguments I always lost. The hope that the next message might finally sound different. All of it slowly loosened its grip. I noticed it one morning while standing in line for coffee. My phone buzzed. Family chat again. I glanced at the screen and then did something that would have been unthinkable a month earlier. I put the phone back in my pocket without reading it. Not out of anger. Out of indifference. That scared me more than hurt ever had. 'Cause hurt meant I still cared deeply. Indifference meant I was finally detaching from expectations that had been draining me for years. At work, my manager pulled me aside. She told me she'd noticed the extra hours. The initiative. the way I handled pressure without spiraling. She offered me more responsibility. A raise wasn't guaranteed yet, but it was on the table. I nodded, thanked her, and walked back to my desk feeling something unfamiliar. Seen. That word echoed in my head. Seen. Not because I was quiet. Not because I was easy. But because I showed up fully without shrinking. That night, I sat down and wrote out a plan. 6 months. 12 months. What I wanted my life to look like without factoring in anyone else's emergencies or expectations. Felt selfish at first. Then it felt necessary. I planned savings goals, career moves, boundaries. I wrote down things I would no longer do. I will not lend money I cannot afford to lose. I will not apologize for needing help. I will not chase people who only reach out when it's convenient. The list felt like permission. Around that time, my dad called. His name on the screen still triggered a small jolt in my chest, but it passed quickly. "Hey," he said. "Your mom says you've been distant." "I've been busy," I replied. "Well," he continued, "you know how she is. She worries. We just want to make sure you're okay." There it was again. Concern without curiosity. Care without responsibility. "I am okay," I said calmly. "I handle my rent situation." "Oh," he said. A pause. "That's good." No follow-up. No question about how. No acknowledgement that I'd asked for help and been turned away. Just relief that the problem had resolved itself without requiring anything from them. After we hung up, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Pride. Sadness. Finality. That call confirmed what I'd already begun to accept. They preferred me capable, not supported. Functional, not vulnerable. As long as I didn't disrupt the image, everything was fine. That night, I looked around my apartment and really saw it for the first time. The chipped table. The mismatched dishes. Quiet. It wasn't impressive. But it was honest. Nothing here pretended to be more than it was. I thought about the pajamas again. Coordination. The performance. The money spent to look close rather than actually be close. For years, I'd believed closeness was something you earned by being agreeable. By not asking for too much. By making yourself useful. Now I understood something simpler and harsher. Real closeness doesn't require costumes. And if it does, it isn't closeness at all. The final bill for the month came in. I paid it. On time. With money I'd earned, borrowed from no one. I stared at the confirmation screen longer than necessary, letting the weight of it sink in. I had survived a moment that should have been easy with family support and instead became a turning point. That survival changed me. I stopped waiting for invitations that came with conditions. I stopped measuring my worth by how easily I fit into someone else's narrative. I stopped apologizing for choosing stability over appearances. And somewhere in that quiet shift, I realized something important. They could keep their matching pajamas. I was done dressing myself to make them comfortable. By the time another month rolled around, the distance between who I used to be and who I was becoming felt measurable. Not dramatic. Not sudden. Just undeniable. I moved through my days with fewer explanations, fewer justifications, and far less fear of disappointing people who had never prioritized me in the first place. The family chat resurfaced with a new topic. A weekend getaway. Cabin. Photos of lake views and fire pits and shopping lists. Someone casually mentioned how expensive everything was getting. I watched the conversation unfold without participating, noticing how easily money flowed when it was attached to enjoyment and how quickly it vanished when it was attached to responsibility. My sister tagged me again. "You should really come this time. It'd be nice." Nice. I stared at the message and felt nothing spike in my chest. No guilt. No anxiety. No urge to rearrange my life to fit into a plan I hadn't helped create. I won't be able to, I replied. I'm focusing on work and saving right now. The response came back slower than usual. Oh, that's practical. Practical. The word lingered. It wasn't meant as praise. Never was. In our family, practical meant boring, unfun, inconvenient. It meant you weren't participating in the fantasy. I closed the chat and set my phone down, feeling a quiet satisfaction in the choice I'd made. For once, my plans weren't being adjusted to accommodate someone else's idea of togetherness. That weekend, while they posted photos of sunsets and drinks and laughter, I worked. I reorganized my budget. I made progress I could see and track. I bought groceries without anxiety. I paid bills without holding my breath. Stability settled over my life slowly, like a blanket you don't realize you needed until it's already warm. On Sunday evening, my mom called. Her tone was careful, measured. "We missed you," she said. "It just wasn't the same without you." I considered that. Really considered it. If it wasn't the same, I said, why did everything still happen exactly as planned? She didn't answer immediately. "You're reading too much into things," she said eventually. "We just want you included." Included. The word used to pull at me. Now it sounded hollow. Inclusion without consideration wasn't inclusion. It was decoration. "I don't need to be included," I replied. "I need to be respected." There it was. The line I'd never crossed before. The boundary I danced around for years because it felt dangerous to name. Her voice tightened. "We do respect you." I thought about the rent message. The pajamas. The ease with which my struggle had been dismissed. "I don't think you understand what that looks like," I said. The call ended shortly after. No shouting. No apology. Just two people recognizing, maybe for the first time, that the dynamic had shifted. Afterward, I sat alone in my apartment, lights low, the hum of the city outside my window. I felt a strange combination of grief and relief. Grief for the family I'd hoped for. Relief that I was no longer chasing it. I realized then that boundaries aren't about controlling other people's behavior. They're about controlling your own participation. And I was done participating in my own dismissal. I stopped sharing details about my finances. I stopped explaining my choices. I stopped shrinking my needs to make them easier to ignore. The absence of constant communication created space. In that space, I found myself. My preferences. My pace. My priorities. One evening, I caught my reflection in the mirror and noticed something subtle but profound. My shoulders weren't tense. My jaw wasn't clenched. I looked settled. That's when it hit me. I wasn't healing because they'd changed. I was healing because I had. They still bought things that didn't matter. They still spent freely on appearances. They still struggled to understand why I'd stepped back. But none of that controlled me anymore. $200 that had once felt like a cliff edge was now a marker. A reminder of the moment I stopped assuming my family would catch me and started catching myself instead. And in doing so, I didn't lose them. I lost the illusion that had been costing me everything. By the time winter settled in, the quiet I'd built around myself felt intentional rather than accidental. My days had a rhythm that wasn't dictated by other people's plans or expectations. Wake up, work, cook, save, sleep, repeat. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. And for the first time in my life, steadiness felt luxurious. The family, on the other hand, grew louder. The fewer reactions they got from me, the more they filled the space themselves. Group chats turned into highlight reels. New purchases. New trips. The new inside jokes I wasn't part of. I noticed how often they used the word "we," as if unity could be declared into existence through repetition alone. One afternoon, my mom sent a message directly to me. "Are you okay? You've been very distant." I read it 3 times before replying. "I'm not distant," I typed. "I'm just not available the way I used to be." There was a long pause. Then, "Well, family should always be available." That sentence landed differently now. It used to feel like a moral rule, a responsibility I was failing. Now it sounded like a demand. "I'm available to myself," I replied. "That has to come first." She didn't respond. That evening, I went for a walk through my neighborhood. The air was sharp. The streets were lit by yellow lamps and quiet conversations drifting from windows. I passed a thrift store and remembered how my family used to joke about my clothes. Practical. Simple. So you. I smiled to myself. They'd never meant it as a compliment, but it had become one. Later that week, my sister called. Her voice was hesitant, like she was stepping onto thin ice. "Mom's upset," she said. "She thinks you're punishing her." "I'm not punishing anyone," I replied. "I'm just not pretending." "Well," my sister continued, "she doesn't understand why you're being so firm." Firm. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. "Because if I'm not firm," I said, "I disappear." Silence filled the line. Not awkward. Heavy. Like something had finally been said out loud that couldn't be taken back. After we hung up, I realized how much energy I used to spend translating myself into versions they might accept. Softer. Easier. Less demanding. Less real. That translation work had been exhausting, and I hadn't even noticed how tired I was until I stopped doing it. My finances continued to stabilize. Slowly. Methodically. Each bill paid on time added a layer of confidence I'd never had before. Not because I had money, but because I had control. One night, while scrolling through old photos on my phone, I found a picture from years ago. A family holiday. Everyone smiling. Me standing at the edge, half cropped out. I studied my face in the photo. The forced smile. Tension around my eyes. I deleted it. Not out of anger. Out of honesty. That version of me didn't exist anymore. The next family gathering came and went without me. No dramatic fallout. No confrontation. Just absence. And in that absence, I noticed something profound. No one asked how I was paying rent now. No one asked if things were easier. No one asked what had changed for me. They talked about the weather, about plans, about purchases, and suddenly I understood something with absolute clarity. They hadn't refused to help me because they couldn't. They refused because my struggle didn't register as important. That truth hurt. But it also freed me. Because once you accept that someone isn't capable of meeting you where you are, you stop breaking yourself trying to reach them. I went to bed that night with a sense of peace that felt earned. Not given. Earned through hard choices, uncomfortable boundaries, and the courage to prioritize survival over approval. I no longer wondered if I mattered to them. I no longer needed the answer. I mattered to me. And that was enough to build a life that didn't require matching pajamas to feel whole. Spring arrived quietly, almost politely, and with it came a version of myself I barely recognized at first. Not because she was louder or bolder, but because she was steadier. Rooted. I moved through my days without the constant background hum of anticipation. No waiting for approval. No bracing for disappointment. Just motion. Forward. I noticed it in small moments. Choosing groceries without checking prices 3 times. Paying rent and still having enough left over to breathe. Saying no to an invitation without rehearsing excuses in my head. These weren't grand victories. They were accumulations. And together they changed everything. The family chat erupted again one afternoon with plans for another coordinated event. This time it was matching jackets. A winter trip that had been booked early. Someone joked about how much it had cost, followed by laughing emojis. I read the messages without flinching. Contrast no longer shocked me. Simply confirmed what I already knew. My sister messaged me privately later. "You've really changed," she wrote. I considered that. "I've stopped adjusting myself," I replied. She didn't answer right away. When she did, it was cautious. "Well, Mom feels like you don't need us anymore." That sentence used to terrify me. The idea of being seen as unnecessary. Now it landed differently. "I never needed less," I typed. "I just needed consistency." She left the message on read. That night, I sat on my couch with the window cracked open, city sounds drifting in. I thought about all the times I'd minimized my needs to maintain harmony. All the moments I'd swallowed frustration because speaking up felt riskier than staying quiet. Truth was, harmony had always come at my expense. And once I stopped paying that price, the balance shifted in ways they weren't prepared for. A few days later, my dad called. Not with small talk. With purpose. "Your mom thinks you're pulling away because of money," he said. I almost laughed. "It's not about money," I replied. "It's about priorities." "Well," he said carefully, "money is complicated." "It isn't," I said. "Not when it's clear what matters to you." Silence stretched between us. "We didn't think it was that serious," he finally admitted. That sentence landed like a delayed echo. Not an apology. Not accountability. Just surprise that the consequences of their choices had reached them at all. "It was serious to me," I said. He sighed. "You've always been strong." There it was again. The label that excused everything. Strength in their vocabulary meant self-sufficiency to the point of neglect. "I don't want to be strong like that anymore," I said. We ended the call shortly after. I didn't feel victorious. I felt resolved. That evening, I opened my laptop and updated my resume. Not because I needed to escape my job, but because I could. Passions are a form of safety, and I was building them deliberately now. Weeks passed. Then months. The distance between me and my family settled into something predictable. Cordial. Shallow. Controlled. And for the first time, that didn't feel like failure. Felt like accuracy. I realized then that relationships don't always end in explosions. Sometimes they fade into the shape they were always meant to take once you stop forcing them to be something else. I didn't announce my boundaries. I didn't demand understanding. I simply lived according to a truth I could no longer unsee. And the more I did, the less power the past held over me. The pajamas. The money. The dismissal. They became reference points, not wounds. Evidence of a pattern I had finally stepped out of. I no longer measured family by shared photos or matching outfits. I measured it by reliability. By presence when it mattered. By whether my survival was treated as optional or essential. And once I set that standard, there was no going back. By the time summer arrived, the story I told myself about my family had finally changed. Not softened. Not rewritten to sound kinder. Just corrected. I stopped narrating my life as a series of misunderstandings and started seeing it as a sequence of clear decisions, repeated often enough to become a pattern. I noticed how easy it was now to spot those patterns in other places. At work. In friendships. In the way people reacted when I set limits instead of offering explanations. Some leaned in with respect. Others drifted away. The difference was immediate and telling. One afternoon, my mom sent a long message. Longer than usual. It started with concern and ended with accusation, wrapped carefully in words like confused, hurt, and family values. She wrote about how different I'd become. How distant. How it felt like I didn't need them anymore. I read it slowly once, then again. I didn't rush to respond. I let myself feel the familiar pull to reassure her, to soften the edges, to say something that would restore the illusion of closeness without changing anything real. Then I didn't do that. Instead, I wrote back the truth. I didn't change because I wanted distance. I changed because I needed stability. When I asked for help and was told no, I had to build something that didn't depend on you. There was no immediate reply. Hours passed. Then a short message arrived. We did what we thought was best. That sentence used to end every conversation. It was the full stop they placed after decisions I wasn't allowed to question. This time it didn't silence me. I know, I replied. And now I'm doing what's best for me. Conversation ended there. Not angrily. Definitively. That evening, I walked home with the sun low in the sky, the heat still clinging to the pavement. I thought about how often I'd confused endurance with loyalty. How I'd stayed in uncomfortable spaces because leaving felt like betrayal. But loyalty that requires self-erasure isn't loyalty. It's fear dressed up as virtue. I passed a family laughing on the sidewalk, kids tugging at parents' hands, voices overlapping. The sight didn't make my chest ache anymore. It made me reflective. I wasn't missing something I'd lost. I was releasing something I'd never truly had. At home, I opened my window and let the evening air in. I made dinner without rushing. I ate without scrolling. I existed without monitoring anyone else's reactions. That kind of peace had once felt impossible. Now it felt earned. My finances were no longer fragile. Not abundant, but resilient. I had margins, buffers, choices. Each one a quiet rebuttal to the belief that I needed to stay small to stay connected. Another family event came and went without me. I found out later through second-hand photos. Smiles. Matching outfits again. Different themes, same performance. I felt nothing spike inside me. No anger. No envy. Just distance. That distance wasn't cold. It was clean. I realized then that healing didn't mean my family would suddenly understand me. It meant I stopped needing them to. Understanding is a gift. Boundaries are a skill. I'd finally learned the skill. $200 that once felt like a verdict on my worth had become a marker in my timeline. Before and after. Before I trusted appearances. After I trusted patterns. And patterns once seen cannot be unseen. I no longer hoped for a different reaction next time. I no longer prepared explanations in advance. I no longer mistook silence for peace. I had built something quieter and stronger. A life that didn't require proof. And as summer deepened, so did my certainty. I wasn't walking away from family. I was walking toward myself, without apology and without costume. By early fall, the distance between me and my family had settled into something that felt permanent, not because it was dramatic, but because it was consistent. There were no big confrontations left to have. No revelations waiting to be uncovered. Everything important had already been said, even if most of it had never been spoken out loud. I began to notice how my body reacted differently to their names on my phone. The spike of adrenaline was gone. The urge to prepare myself emotionally had faded. When my mom texted now, it felt like reading a message from someone I used to know well, not someone who still had access to my nervous system. She asked about work. I answered briefly. She mentioned the weather. I replied politely. There was no invitation beneath the words. No hidden request. Just surface-level exchange. For the first time, that was enough. I realized then that what I had been craving all those years wasn't closeness. It was safety. And safety doesn't come from people who disappear when things get inconvenient. It comes from predictability, respect, and the knowledge that your needs won't be treated as optional. Around that time, I helped a coworker through a rough week. Nothing dramatic. I listened. I brought coffee. I followed up without being asked. At the end of the week, she hugged me and said, "Thank you for showing up." The words stuck with me. Showing up. I thought about how rarely my family had shown up in ways that mattered. Not because they were absent, but because their presence was conditional. They were there when things looked good, when photos could be taken, when effort could be displayed without discomfort. They were not there when help required inconvenience. That difference used to confuse me. Now it clarified everything. One evening, I opened the family chat and scrolled back months, rereading messages with new eyes. I saw patterns I hadn't allowed myself to see before. Requests that went unanswered. Questions deflected. Needs minimized. And always the expectation that I would adapt quietly. I closed the app and deleted the conversation. Not out of anger. Out of closure. Deleting it didn't erase my family. It erased the constant reminder that I was expected to be available without being considered. As my life continued to stabilize, I noticed something else. I laughed more easily. I slept better. I made decisions faster. Without checking how they might be perceived. Without imagining reactions that no longer mattered. I had space now. Emotional space. Mental space. And in that space, I discovered how much of myself I'd been holding back. I stopped explaining my choices to people who weren't impacted by them. I stopped volunteering details about my finances. I stopped assuming my needs were burdensome. The more I practiced that, the less I recognized the version of myself who had once begged for $200 and then apologized for asking. That version wasn't weak. She was trained. Trained to believe that love was something you earned by being agreeable. That support was a privilege, not a responsibility. That asking for help was a moral failure rather than a human one. I wasn't angry at her anymore. I was grateful. She'd gotten me here. And now it was my turn to protect her by never putting her back in that position again. I realized something else too. Distance doesn't always mean disconnection. Sometimes it's the only way to finally see things clearly. I didn't hate my family. I didn't resent them. I simply understood them. And understanding didn't require proximity. By the time leaves began to fall outside my window, I felt grounded in a way I never had before. Not because everything was perfect, but because nothing was pretending anymore. I wasn't performing stability for anyone. I was living it. By the time the year circled back to where it had started, the story no longer felt raw. Felt complete. Not wrapped up neatly, not forgiven, not forgotten. Just finished. Like a chapter you don't reread because you finally understand why it was written the way it was. I didn't announce my distance. I didn't make a speech. I didn't block anyone dramatically or delete my family from my life in one clean motion. I simply stopped orbiting around people who treated my stability like a personal preference instead of a necessity. That choice changed everything quietly. Holidays came and went. I spent some alone. Some with friends. Some working by choice, not desperation. No matching outfits. No coordinated photos. No forced gratitude. Just days that belonged to me. My parents still reached out occasionally. Birthdays. Short check-ins. Polite updates. There was no reckoning, no moment where they suddenly understood what they had done. And I realized something important. Closure doesn't require comprehension from the people who hurt you. It requires honesty with yourself. I stopped waiting for an apology that would never come. I stopped imagining a version of them who would one day say, "We should have helped you." 'Cause whether they said it or not didn't change the fact that they hadn't. $200 became symbolic. Not because of its value, but because of its clarity. It revealed a truth I had been cushioning for years. They were willing to spend extravagantly on comfort, image, and shared enjoyment. They were not willing to spend modestly on my survival. Once you see that, you can't unsee it. I learned that love isn't proven by words or traditions or group photos. It's proven by response. by whether someone shows up when the situation is inconvenient and unglamorous, by whether your crisis registers as urgent or optional. Mine had been optional. Accepting that didn't break me. It rebuilt me. I stopped defining family as people who share my last name. I started defining it as people who show consistency, who don't need reminders to care, who don't weigh my needs against aesthetics. I built a life that didn't rely on emergency generosity. I built savings. I built habits. I built self-trust. I learned how to ask for help from people who had already shown they could offer it without resentment. And most importantly, I learned how to stop asking people who had already shown they wouldn't. Sometimes I think about the version of myself who sat on that bed, staring at the phone, surrounded by photos of matching pajamas while calculating how to keep a roof over her head. I don't feel shame for her anymore. I feel respect. She didn't explode. She didn't beg again. She paid attention. That was the beginning. Revenge didn't look like confrontation. It didn't look like cutting words or public exposure. It didn't look like proving them wrong. Revenge looked like independence built slowly, deliberately, without their approval. It looked like silence where I used to over-explain. It looked like boundaries where I used to bend. It looked like a life that no longer required matching costumes to feel whole. They kept their photos. They kept their traditions. They kept their image. I kept my dignity. And in the end, that was worth more than any amount of money they were willing to spend.